Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ryan Bijan, host of Cowtown Movie Classics, and we are closing out our Year of the Dragon series with the film that honestly introduced me to martial arts cinema when I was a kid. And to this day, it is considered by many people, myself included, one of the greatest films, well, certainly the greatest live action film ever based on a video game property. From 1995, it is the original feature film version of Mortal Kombat. And joining us tonight, he has had a hand in every single Mortal Kombat video game since 1992. He is an artist, video game developer, martial artist, and my first introduction to him was as the Thunder God Raiden in the original Mortal Kombat game. So please give a warm welcome to Mr. Carlos Pesina. How are you doing tonight, Carlos?
Hey Ryan, thanks again. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'd like to thank everybody out there. And yeah, Mortal Kombat, the 1995 movie, is such a classic, such a great movie.
It's certainly up there. As I mentioned, you have been a part of this franchise, really part of the franchise DNA since the very beginning. So, what is your earliest involvement with the Mortal Kombat video game?
So earliest involvement would be being the actor Raiden. Being at the concept level with Tobias and Boone and my brother Daniel Pesina, Richard DeVizio, Hosung Pak, and Liz Malecki. And and Anthony Marquez, and unfortunately, he couldn't be in the game because he injured his foot. But then he was, he's known as Kung Lao in MK2.
Yeah.
So that being on the development team at Midway Games for 27 plus years and being I guess, actor, performer, illustrator, combat design, motion capture, technician. Also building the studio for NetherRealm Studios, the motion capture studio, and just choreography, helping out directing, helping the creative director Ed Boon, working with Tobias on mythologies and special forces, just
Mhm.
being involved, in every aspect of development for all those games.
Oh, wow. So, going back to that initial Mortal Kombat game, like me, I know you're a big cinephile. And for our audience, the past few weeks, we wanted to kind of have a wide breadth of martial arts films to show. So, of course, we showed some early Jackie Chan, some Bruce Lee, some Shaw Brothers. And that original Mortal Kombat game, to me, especially as I'm older now as a movie fan, you go back and look at it, you look at the character costumes, the looks, the backgrounds. It has this very kind of mystical, I guess, oriental flavor, if you want to call it that way. But you can definitely see the cinematic influences in that initial Mortal Kombat game. Everything from Enter the Dragon to the Five Fingers of Death to, I mean, you name it. So, was this a conscious sort of effort on your part, on the part of Ed Boon and John Tobias? What were these discussions like as far as influences went?
Well, I think it was more or less a conscious part of a collaboration, a collective collaboration. Whether John had envisioned like, hey, I want to make and he didn't say this, but I want to have an Enter the Dragon kind of fantasy type, and what was popular in the late 90s, the whole Jet Li and fantasy like wire fu stuff.
Mhm.
I think, John Tobias was a visionary and wanted to head more or less in that direction and, do some kind of like mystical stuff because, obviously being just a regular fighting game would be, boring. And John and I come from the same, school of art where it's like, hey, real life is great, but when you add a touch of fantasy to it, it's wonderful. You know what I mean? People are just drawn to fantasy more or less, because life is boring sometimes. And when I mean boring, not like everyday life, like is just like, oh, mundane. It's just like, you want to add this sense of fantasy to it. And I think, when John came up with, at least I can speak on behalf on my character,
Mhm.
Raiden, he said, "Hey, I want you to be the guy with the hat, the electricity." And immediately, we have this
Just a
discussion of
reference.
like,
Perfect.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's that having that ability to have a person who's developing something, a creative director, and being able to connect with them and say, I get what you're saying. I watched Shaw Brothers, Golden Harvest, as well as Tobias did, and then we pick out Storm from Big Trouble in Little China, big
Mhm.
John Carpenter fan, and and saying, hey, bring the elements from Five Deadly Venoms, and anything Golden Harvest, Shaw Brothers, any other, you name the obscure kung fu movie reference, Master of the Flying Guillotine. And like you just said, Five
Yeah.
Fingers of Death, just bring that and absorb that and try to bring a character to life. And that's the same with my brother with Johnny Cage, just wanted to, and here's the thing. We also bought our own characteristics to each of those characters per se. Like, I'm usually the quiet, kind of, don't say too much and just try to, not showboat as much as Hosung being Liu Kang, or, as flaunty as well as, my brother Daniel, or as, outspoken as Rich DeVizio as Kano, we all
Hmm.
had our different personalities. And Anthony Marquez with his whole like Clint Eastwood Western style, it's kind of the Asian spaghetti Western fusion, that he bought to Liu Kang, or sorry, Kung Lao,
Hmm.
and then the Bruce Lee, but yet Ho Sung Pak version of himself as Liu Kang. We just all tried to bring certain characteristics to those characters, more or less, our own persona, more or less. So
Yeah, and all those characters, especially in the first two games, all very distinctive and iconic. And like you said, you channeled these influences from Big Trouble in Little China, the Shaw Brothers' Golden Harvest, and then you created something entirely unique. In a way, it's almost like Star Wars, right? George Lucas, he was inspired by the old movie serials, the old science fiction films, Western plays, and then the
yeah,
samurai
Flash
film.
Gordon, everything, yeah.
Flash Gordon, Akira Kurosawa meets Flash Gordon, but of course Star
Yes.
Wars is so unique and distinct, and that's kind of what you guys ended up with Mortal Kombat. But there is a point, and I think maybe you can clarify this. So you mentioned your brother Daniel Pesina. Not only was he Scorpion and Sub Zero, he's Johnny Cage. Now, as we know, Johnny Cage, at least in the finished game, he is a loving homage to Jean Claude Van Damme. The rumor I had always heard was Mortal Kombat was originally pitched as a game starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. Is there truth to that, or is that sort of gotten lost in osmosis? What's the story behind that?
Well, and once again, this is my opinion. I think it
Yeah.
was kind of lost in osmosis. It was never pitched as a Van Damme game. That didn't come till later on, when we did our first initial. I would say it's like a vertical slice of the game. You had a
Hmm.
few characters, and then I'm sure they wanted to tie a license to it. Pardon me, a license to it somehow. But maybe that fell through because that wasn't mentioned until I didn't hear that at all when I was playing Raiden at all. Like, hey, we're
Really?
gonna
Okay.
get Van Damme, because then I would have been like, oh, well, then I got to step up my game a little bit.
Hmm.
Because Van Damme at the time was, that's 85. He's very popular. Just probably wrapped up on like Cyborg and going on to another movie. And I can't, I don't know his filmography, so I don't know what movie between 85 and 90-ish
Yeah.
he was doing. But once again, you know, uh, I think that was just an afterthought because it was never pitched that way. And the first phone call we would have gotten would have been like, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing," and that was never present during that. But once again, that's my opinion. That's how I viewed it and how I saw it, and how it transpired for myself. So,
Hmm.
not to disappoint people, because I know they love Van Damme, and
Yeah.
I do too. He's a great actor, a great action star. You know, he had his peak between the 80s and 90s, and then, just recently had a resurgence. I'm sure he's a great guy.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. So I'm sure as a young kid, you said you went to art school. You studied art in college. Was that your main focus? Was to get into visual art, or what was your background?
Yeah, at first, well, that's one of those when I was 15, that
Yeah.
type of history. That's one of those things like I went to school to become an accountant because at the time my parents were very traditional. We're talking
Mm.
this is 86, and they said you have to have a traditional type job, not a steel worker, because that was getting towards the end of, all that working with your hands and how my
Yeah.
dad made a living. So I figured, well, I'll go into accounting. It was good with math, but since 5 years old, my brother Daniel and my father and my mother always encouraged me to be artistic. So since five, I've been drawing and illustrating, and accounting. Got my associate's degree in accounting. Finished all that up, and then I didn't like that, so I
Yeah.
decided to. It's one of those things you're following your passion, you're listening to your parents, because they know best. And I decided, well, at the time, my brother Tony, who's the next oldest after Daniel, he went to school to become a math teacher and become a substitute teacher for, high school in the Chicago school district. And I always saw him at the table, just doing his formulas. And I'm like, well, I really like that too. So I'll get into that and went to all the way up to differential equations. And my ma had a talk with me right after I had watched this Channel 11 like motivational speakers, saying, "Hey, do what you love. Don't get caught up in the whole, what everybody thinks you should be." And then next day my mom talked to me and she said, "You know what? I see you doing all of this and I really see you drawing every day, staying up late drawing." Because, we had a group of friends that would draw. We love comics, and we tried doing a magazine together with Tobias way back in the day with Now Comics and everything. And Now Comics went defunct, and that didn't work out. So my mom's like, I really think you should go to art school. So I went that week, applied to the American Academy of Art, and because I had Tobias had recommended it. A friend, Arturo Gonzalez, went there for a little bit for a life drawing class. Said you should go because all the classics went there. Andrew Loomis, Bridgman, they set foot in that building. And from then on, I just got my associate's degree in electronic design because at the time we were at the cusp of Adobe Photoshop. This is 85. So Photoshop was obviously invented in 77 by ILM, and then it was taken over by whoever proprietary, Adobe, and then they ran with it. So I learned that, and then there was a job opening, and this is way after Mortal Kombat. We filmed Mortal Kombat 1 and 2. There was a job opening at Midway, and I just constantly called Jack Hager, who was the art director there. Great guy, you know, famous for Trog, Revax, a lot of like great games. Him and George Petro, great, great people. He had an opening, interviewed me. Once again, I'm friends with Tobias and, kind of friends with Ed. And he's kind of like, Jack was like, oh, I don't know, everybody's their friend. And, when we do a project together, you're all going to leave and go with your, onto your friend's project, which I completely understand, and he was doing a hockey game and I called him every Monday, like at like 10 o'clock, 10:45, and just said, hey, how's it going? Am I still in the running? And then after a couple months, they hired me and my first game was open ice. So there's
Wow.
that whole I know rambled on and on, but it's
No.
it's just all these like it's like Ratatouille. Anytime anybody mentions a question, it's like,
Yeah.
you're going through your history of your life and it's just wonderful to share, being able
Oh,
to share it.
of course. So, like, going back to Mortal Kombat 1, you said you started off around like 1991. You're doing I guess at that point it wasn't motion capture, but you're doing the digitizing work, playing Raiden in this game. You're basically having fun with all your childhood friends. I'm sure at that point as a young man, it's exciting to be involved with a video game in any capacity, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you're in your early 20s.
Hmm.
You have all your friends that, first of all, you have this creative mind, John Tobias and then Ed Boon, and you're having a free reign of doing a project. You're with all your friends, and it's just it's an aesthetical experience because you're so free to do what you need to do and what you want to do, and so free of people asking you to do things, and you're not bound by any kind of rules whatsoever, and more or less when I mean corporate rules, or and when I say that, I mean that in a good way, not like how HR stuff right now. I'm talking about you're inside a studio, somebody has a vision and tells you, this is, I think, the direction I want to go in, and then you do more creative things to get that vision executed, and it's a collaboration, and I think that's what was wonderful about that we were all able to be in the studio, joke around in between the sets, because everybody's seen that, where we're all like, or making fun of each other, or just joking around and just having the freedom and being happy during that whole entire time.
Hmm.
That's very rare.
Oh no, certainly. But at what point? So the game comes out is it's 1992, right? Is when it first hits arcades.
Yes.
That initial game. So at what point? And then quickly, it almost seems like it became this overnight cultural phenomenon. At what point did you realize, like, wait a second, I think we worked on something big? When did that first come to your awareness?
It seemed like, I knew it was popular,
Hmm.
but for instance, it didn't really hit me until Acclaim and that whole commercial came online. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we would go to shows and we would help out with, they would tell us not numbers, but hey, this is really successful Midway, and they would do their trade shows, and this is before E3. They
Hmm.
would have their own arcade trade shows before everything was home console. And, they would invite us to go put on a show. We were actually the first people to put a show on at trade shows, get people attracted to come over, play the game, and then go, I want 50 copies, 20 copies, like Dave and Buster's or whoever would be like, oh, I want, 100 copies, and even doing stuff like that did not uh, it didn't dawn on me like, holy cow, this is just such a great thing. For me, it was, hey, do the best you can do, um do the greatest thing you can do, meaning like, put your best foot forward, do what you can, and if people such as yourself or consumers, or players like us or anybody else picks up on it, then that's just the gravy on everything.
Yeah.
And I try to be as, and this is a, I view it as a good thing. I try to be as humble as possible, no matter what, no matter the amount of success of something, because ultimately we all have to answer to one person. So I feel like, hey, I gotta stay grounded, and there's a history involved with that. And I think all of us are like that, myself, my brother, and everybody else, and it's one of those things where you really don't experience it until you like, I just recently did a convention, and people come up to you and they talk to you and they tell you like, I know you hear this all the time, and it's like, no, 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 I need to hear it because this is why I did it, because I made you guys happy, you guys put me where I'm at, and it's a synergy of life.
So, of course, like any big franchise, and I think this mirrors the earlier Fighter franchise in a lot of ways as well, is of course you have the arcade game. Then soon after you get the multimedia blitz. You have the console home releases. You have a series of comic books from Malibu Comics. You have the Hasbro action figure toy line. So it's not
Yes.
long. It's not long before Hollywood starts knocking. When did you become aware that this was going to be a big New Line Cinema motion picture?
I think that was, that was after, well, it was in between the Acclaim and the Mortal Kombat 2 when it was finally finished and released,
Hmm.
and then they were going to do another home version that, the whole Larry Kazanov, Mortal Kombat, talks happened because I was at, I think right after that, I was at the studio, and they had this guy, Roger Sharp, who's their marketing guy, great guy, worked at Playboy before and very like knew the network of marketing, excellent person to try to get things rolling. And I believe him and, the rest of the corporate um, higher ups, Ken Fedesna and Neil Nicastro probably got the ball rolling to do, a movie. And I'm sure, Ed and John had a hand in that. And that was one of those things where I remember being at a acclaim party in Chicago and, the discussion of that. And it was like, the buzz was like, oh my God, can we for myself, I was like, oh, can I be an extra in it? And then you have Ho Sung, who was a rising, at the time, kind of rising in Hollywood a little bit, and with Jackie Chan doing Drunken Master 2, you
Yeah.
know, coming from the Turtles 1 and 2. Same with my brother, they were like, oh man, we should try to, to get an audition or whatever. And when you see that, you're like, holy cow, this is pretty big. Obviously we saw the baseball caps, the shirts. We already saw the comic book and the regular shirts Midway sold, but once you start seeing all of that in your, whether it's the Walmart or Kmart or whatever it was at the time, Target, when you see that in the stores, you're like, wow, that, and I think this is pretty big. It's going
Mhm.
to be a big franchise.
And the moment you saw the film for the first time, did they do like a premiere for the Midway employees, or like were you invited to anything special, or did you just kind of see it in the theater like everyone else?
So I believe, and once again, this is just, this is so many years ago. I believe John and Ed went to the premiere, and then we had a premiere when it opened up, and John and Ed were there, and obviously everybody from Midway, like 200 plus people in a theater, watching this movie, and just being amazed at how great it came out. But it's a double-edged sword when you're actually, I got Christopher Lambert playing, myself, not saying that he was playing me, but actually the
Right.
character Raiden, somebody that I defined. I was like, holy cow, you got Highlander up there, and my brother and myself and a bunch of the other guys loved, Christopher Lambert in The Sicilian and Tarzan, you name it, and we were like, holy cow, that dude is, really talented. And seeing other people like Robin Shu was Ho Sung Pak's kung fu brother in California, went and worked out with him, before the movie stuff, and just amazed at like, wow, that guy is playing Liu Kang. It's like a red carpet moment, you're sitting in the theater, something that you worked on that's successful, and seeing that on celluloid is just it's mind blowing.
Oh, I can imagine. So, for the people in the audience who have never seen the original Mortal Kombat film, what do they have to look forward to?
They have to look forward to a kindly loosely based. I still think it's the best one out of all the, including this last one from 2021. But
I
that's just my
agree. Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, I
That's just
agree.
my opinion.
Yeah.
And it is a Hollywood rendition of, the comic book to an extent. It's not going to be true to format, but you have to change things in order to appeal to a wider audience who's never followed, the franchise more or less.
Hmm.
So they have, a lot of action to look forward to, a lot of 90 95. It's like mid 95's action. It's not going to be obviously, the Raid or, John Wick, because obviously that's what it was, American action back then in the mid 90s. So they have that, they have humor, they have if they just played one and two, meaning your viewers, and they see that game, they're going to actually like the movie a lot. They're going to love it because you have Scorpion and Sub-Zero on the screen for the first time. That's one of those things, like you see people playing the video game, back and forth, and then when you actually went to the movies, it was like, holy cow, they're doing some of the moves that they do in the game, and you get to see them turn around in their costumes and act, and that's the things that we had to look forward to in the movie. Good storytelling, nice pacing, Tagawa doing his, Shang Tsung rendition, which is great, very very kind of Han, from Enter the Dragon-ish,
Yeah.
Goro's Bolo, you got Robin Shu as, the Liu Kang, and then what's his name? Johnny Cage.
Lyndon Ashby.
Yes, Ashby as the John Saxon version of,
Yeah.
the whole, yeah, it's just wonderful, and then you got a godly presence of Lambert who's in there for like maybe a total of like 5, 10 minutes, but just his presence is really good. The effects are, what they were for '95. I think it's a fun movie. It's enjoyable.
Well, Carlos, thank you so much for your time. If you're in the audience, please stick around after the film so you can hear the rest of our conversation. Without further ado, from 1995, director Paul W.S. Anderson's Mortal Kombat.
Enjoy.
Look, as much as I love Street Fighter with Van Damme, and as fun as some of the other, video game movies can be, I think truly, like on a storytelling level, on a fidelity level to the original material, to me, this Mortal Kombat movie is still the best.
Oh, absolutely. You got Chris Casamassa as Scorpion. He's legendary. Great guy. There was one thing I wish. That's one thing where you look back and you're like, man, I wish, my brother was cast as Cage. Obviously, there's a reason why,
Hmm.
he wasn't. It's Hollywood. You need somebody with a name to grab people to come in. But I was like, wow, if Chris Casamassa fought against my brother, the way I envision both how they move, I'm like, that would have been a fantastic movie, But with Ashby in it, it was a great scene with the forest scene. You have Raiden coming in with blasting both Scorpion and Sub-Zero, the first time they meet and they're on screen, and you're just like you're just so excited to see the two. They come out and you think there's this is going to be this big brawl, and then Raiden shows up. It's just
Hmm.
wonderful.
Yeah. Why do you have to be the party pooper, man? Why does Raiden have to go and put a stop to all that action?
I know he was very like, oh no, we gotta no fighting on the boat.
Yeah. Well, as we talked earlier, you're a big fan of Hong Kong cinema, action cinema. In this movie, it came out in 95, so it's kind of at an interesting turning point in American pop culture because even in this film, for the first time, we're getting a little bit more of that Hong Kong style action and choreography in a mainstream Hollywood film. So, like, between this and Rumble in the Bronx with Jackie Chan, which made him a household name in the United States, how do you feel about Mortal Kombat's impact on that genre in America?
I think it was okay. And once again, I say that because I'm subjected to a lot of content back then which wasn't available to a lot of people. Meaning, we would seek out all those movies, whether it was Jet Li, Fong Sayuk, Once Upon a Time in China,
Mhm.
all those movies, and seeing Mortal Kombat and uh kind of correlating that to all those movies, we thought it was, kind of a mid to lower tier only because we're used to, I'm a martial artist. We love
Mhm.
wushu, we love Jet Li, and we're comparing it to that, meaning action wise, not storytelling. And
Yeah.
once again, not more or less to how do you put it? Because it's content that you're in, and you're like, when you're so close to content that you help create, help design, and collaborate, in your mind, you have a different imagination of things as other people, whether they're in Hollywood or,
Mhm.
writing a book, they have a different a viewpoint of certain things or imagination of how creating things should look. But once again, when you're seeing something that you were involved in up on the screen and people are going to the theater to see it, you admire it, you know. So I would definitely put it on the list of, movies you should watch at least once a year. You got movies like Chuck Norris, The Octagon, Good Guys Wear Black, Enter the Dragon. Then you go into, that's all American films, the American Ninja, all the Kasugi films. And then once again, like myself, you're trying to relate that to, like, oh, how was the Seven Samurai film compared to this? It's a different film altogether. But I would put it as entertaining, and you gotta at least watch it once a year. I do. I watch it once a year, so it's
Yeah.
fun.
Oh yeah, no, certainly. And it's you mentioned it earlier, the comparisons, the parallels between this film and Enter the Dragon. I'm 99% sure I saw Mortal Kombat first. I must have been like what, maybe 6 or 7 years old. A couple of years later, I got Enter the Dragon on VHS. And I remember seeing that for the first time. And of course, I was blown away. But I was like, wait a second, you have the three heroes. They're being invited to an island tournament. And there's this guy, Han, and there's a big conspiracy, and then you have Bolo, who's this big muscular, who's basically Gore. It's like, wait a second, this is literally the plot of Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have that fantasy aspect of Mortal
Yeah,
Kombat with, Raiden with the electricity. And what's great is Kazamasa using that spear, to float around like in the forest and chase Johnny Cage, Ashby as
yeah,
Cage, and him going, "Oh my God," it's just fun, and obviously it's early CGI, before Jurassic Park where we were all wowed, and I'm
hmm,
sure they were on a shoestring budget or just had a budget, back then, and you didn't have good CGI or great CGI. You were just on the cusp. But when we watched it, we were amazed still, with the thing like, doing, and you're like, oh
yeah,
my God, that's Scorpion Spear. That's so cool. They added that element. It wasn't just a spear. It was like an alien thing, and it's neat. And once again, that's a great thing how collaborations start. Somebody does, oh, my brother does a spear out of hand, and then the movie does the spear, but then it comes out and it's the alien mouth. That's great.
hmm,
That's great content. You know. But
yeah,
yes, Enter the Dragon was just it was a cultural phenomenon and a landmark movie, that set the tone for all martial arts movies.
hmm. Yeah, certainly. And it still holds up just like Mortal Kombat does. But actually, going back to your point earlier about how you guys were growing up in the 80s and early 90s and watching a lot of that great Hong Kong stuff when it hadn't even been released really in the United States, as I'm sure you're getting watching it on home video, VHS. I don't know if it's bootlegs or how you're getting access to some of this stuff, but I grew up in the 90s, so of course Jackie Chan was one of my heroes because of the Rush Hour films, Shanghai Noon, Rumble in the Bronx. But it wasn't until I got a little bit older that I finally saw Police Story. And that movie
Oh
blew
yeah.
my mind. This is uncut. They probably don't have the same safety regulations that they do here in Hollywood. So when I saw what Jackie Chan was, and it got me to watch the rest of his filmography. And, I was just so blown away by how talented this guy was. You look at Sammo Hung from the 70s and 80s, you and Bio, you met like all these amazing martial artists who were doing great stuff in the 80s and 90s in Hong Kong.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. I was born in '67, and my dad would take me. I actually saw Fist of Fury, Chinese Connection, and Enter the Dragon when they were released,
Hmm.
in the theater. And my dad took my brother and myself, and it was one of those things. We went to downtown Chicago. Not that it wasn't safe. It was just, a harder part of town back then. And, going to see films, there was a place called the McVickers, and I can't remember where the location, whether I don't think it was on Randolph, but it was, just outside of State Street. And they had three kung fu movies for $1. And when I was like 12 years old, first actually starting my traditional, because I studied martial arts with my brother, but traditionally learning, by 11 and 12, going to an actual school and having a Chinese teacher, we would go to the McVickers, and for $1, we would see three kung fu movies.
Hmm.
We would see like Five Deadly Venoms, we would see Seven Grandmasters and whatever else movie. And I remember like between 78 and 80, Master of the Flying Guillotine coming out and wanting to see that so bad. And the run was just one weekend. And
Hmm.
my friend Arturo Gonzalez went to see it. And the next, like Monday, I'm what they would consider, what is that, middle school now or whatever. I was just like in sixth or seventh grade,
Yeah.
and Arthur telling me the experience of like this guy pulls out, like the guillotine, throws it, and then it was kind of like Street Fighter actually. That movie. I don't know if have you ever seen Master of the Flying Guillotine?
The Jimmy Wong Yu. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Jimmy. Yeah, right. And it's exactly Street Fighter. You know
Because
what I
right,
mean? They
'cause
got
that one,
the
there's the Indian guy, the yogi that has the
exactly.
stretch. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you got the Thai boxer, and and it's just such a great movie. And I remember him telling me, and I'm like, being so mad. I'm like, F, I missed it. I did get to see it in the theaters, and I finally, believe it or not, I saw part of it one night, like at 3:30 in the morning. They had it on like, local TV. This is before VHS and whatever. Couldn't find it on VHS. And then I remember like on MK5, my buddy Louis Mangabot, who was a character artist on Deadly Alliance, he said, "Hey man, I forget what theater, Century Theater in Chicago is showing a remastered version of Master of the Flying Guillotine," and I just friggin' freaked out. And I'm like, "Let's, we're working here late, we're crunching. Instead of having dinner, let's go see Master of the Flying Guillotine and an hour and a half come back and still crank on, Deadly Alliance." And that's what we did. And it was just, well, once again, that way everything was accessible back in, in the 2000s. We just had, like you said, bootlegs galore on eBay. Just getting any movie you were like you said, Police Story, uh, Meals on Wheels, whatever, what a Prodigal Son from Yun Biao, and just, crazy movies, Shogun Assassin, all of those, and just getting that stuff and just absorbing it.
Yeah, well, in your line of work, does that count as like a tax write-off, right? Because it's going towards, it's inspiring you in what you do for your day job, right? So I'm sure it counts.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like from the 2000s, but now I think tax laws are different for all that. But yeah,
Yeah,
I was doing that, doing VCDs from China, learning martial arts to try to implement them in MK5 through with Deadly Alliance all the way through Deception and Armageddon, and trying to get that whole change combo style,
yeah.
trying to develop that. But yeah, exactly. It's just a wonderful time back then.
So Mortal Kombat, it's released in '95. It is this huge blockbuster success. What does that mean for you guys as the developers at Midway? Does that put a fire under your ass? It's like, okay, what does this mean for the future of the video game franchise at that point?
Well, I think at the time, this is after, I think this is just after two was released, and they're going into three, and that's putting a fire under, Tobias and Ed, but they're creative people and they're able to adapt, and they feel like the pressure like anybody else. And at the time, I was working on just Open Ice, just starting to work on that game development. and just touching base with MK3, but seeing, all the creative stuff they were doing, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be great, and yeah, it does to an extent, just a little bit, because you already lit a fire under Hollywood's ass to make a movie, and
Yeah.
then they got to come back and go, okay, well, we did a couple things, now you got to step up, and it's Mortal Kombat has standed the test of time to an extent because we try to cater to the fans to an extent and try to listen to everybody and try to make great content more or less.
Absolutely. And obviously, you guys have succeeded because now the video game franchise, even though they're calling it Mortal Kombat 1, it's technically the 12th main installment in the series. So, I mean, obviously, you guys are doing what the people love and people keep coming back. And to me, the Mortal Kombat franchise, it's not just about the blood, the gore, the violence, but I think you guys created. It's a genuinely compelling mythology. It's interesting. Each character has their own backstory, their own personality, so it certainly feels unique from a lot of the other fighting games out there.
Oh, absolutely. It was a labor of love. You had a group of talented individuals getting together to create something they loved, bringing what they like to it, whether it's cultural or I don't want to say historic, but just bringing all these things together that are in your head and being able to be free in development, and not having those corporate restrictions or executives telling you like, hey, we this focus group doesn't like how Raiden shoots his lightning or anything. We were just like, oh, this is how it's going to look. Does that look cool? And what was great was also that you had friends who were able to tell each other when things looked great or they looked horrible, and that pushed you to be better, like a competition, but not competition, a friendly competition,
Mhm.
and I think that's what made it successful, just that collaboration.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So the last guest we had on here, we actually got to interview the actor Jay Tabaret, who played Vega in the Street Fighter movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme. And I
That's
spoke.
awesome.
Oh no, yeah, he great, super great guy, very charismatic. He knew everything about the games, the film itself, a lot of great stories. But so I asked Jay about his experience because I don't know if you remember this. They did Street Fighter the movie, and then they turned it into Street Fighter the movie, the game, which felt kind of
Yes.
like their version. It almost became a little bit of a Mortal Kombat ripoff in and of itself. And I was just curious, like going back to the first three games, essentially, can you explain the digitization process? What was that like in those early days?
Well, before we get to that, it's funny you should
Sure.
mention Street Fighter the game because that was actually produced here in Chicago, and my wife Jennifer Hedrick actually worked on that game,
Oh
which is
wow.
funny. Before she went to Midway, she worked on Street Fighter the movie game with Louis Mangabot, who was also in the MK5 character group, MK6 and MK7, Deception, Deadly Alliance, and Armageddon.
Yeah.
And that's funny you mentioned that. But with digitization was, Midway had their own proprietary software. Warren Davis had a thing called WTARG, and what that would do was, we were called in to come in. They had painted this background blue at the time, and it's one of those things when with John and meaning John Tobias and all of us. Um, Back in the 80s, we did not have the internet. So what we would have was this magazine called Cinefex,
Hmm.
and we loved ILM and we wanted to absorb everything that they did because, once again, we're creative people and we want to figure out how they did everything. And obviously we weren't able to afford, SGI computers or any type of, like heavy duty hardware to do things. We would try to figure out like how did they do the TIE fighter on a background, and then we saw that they had the blue screen moment. So what John did was, and once again I have to get into his head on how he figured all this out, but they did at Midway, but you know, we had this blue background, and then what Warren Davis's software genius guy, very very talented, actor, magician, went on a couple conventions with him and picked his brain on certain things. But he had this software that would, it was kind of like back in the day, there was another software called D Paint, and it did the same exact thing as D Paint. So you would have your image here, this background would be all blue, and it would strip everything. But
Hmm.
it wasn't super accurate to an extent. You would still have to go around and do the pixels, and pixels are like stair steppy. There's no anti-aliasing at the
Right.
time. So, John would have to go in frame by frame. What they would do is they would film it, and then they were able to process it through the PC with Warren's proprietary software that he developed for Midway, and able to take frame by frame, not like Photoshop now where you just have, your frame or After Effects. It
Hmm.
was very archaic, and you would have to go in, and sometimes you would have to literally, like, step by step do like the cutout of every single movement, and you're running at 60 frames a second. So just imagine 60 frames times, whether you're throwing a punch, 8 to 10 frames, that's already 60 frames all the way through that you got to cut out, or 600 depending upon what it was. And it's just, we would stand there, my brother had already went through with John for like a couple weeks, up to 4 weeks of doing combat design. And I think I was a third character because I think Rich went before me. So I was the third character. I'd come in, they'd say, "Oh, do a high punch, do a low punch, do you know what I mean? Just go through the whole cycle." And then if we needed to pick anything up afterwards, we would be called in. So I'd get dressed, go in front of the blue screen. They would have a high 8 camera,
Hmm.
capturing actual film on a cassette, not like now where it's just, digits, onto a solid state drive, and, pressing the button like, okay, record, okay, now do high punch, and do it that way. It's such a different world how like technology has come from that, before we had tapes, now it's just on the phone and you're like, well, I want to erase Carlos back there and then just do this, and it's all done, not magically, but obviously you have like, I'm not saying AI, but you have, whatever, taking parts of the background and filming that all in, and it's just so much easier now.
Yeah, I can imagine. So let me ask you too, like looking back, as you mentioned, you're retired now, but you had quite a fruitful career with Midway and then of course NetherRealm Studios. What is your proudest memory? Like which of your contributions to this franchise are you the most proud of?
That's difficult to say because I look at every project as I have to have a moment in there. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? Like when you set a goal for something, you always uh you always take like, oh, okay, I'm gonna let's say you're gonna make dinner. You always look at like, I'm gonna make dinner, I'm gonna make this the best dinner, right? But then the next week you're like, oh, okay, I got to let's say you're gonna make a model, a Gundam model. Okay, this is gonna be the best one. So for me, I look at every project like there is a defining moment during every single one of those projects. But overall, obviously, having that impact on Mortal Kombat and being able to, one, be Raiden, obviously, and defining that character for everybody after me to be like that, the person that I am, that I defined, Raiden as that character. And then two, um, along those same lines, you know, uh, being able to, you know, obviously, this is just my opinion. Mortal Kombat 4 wasn't really received pretty well, and I really structured Mortal Kombat 5 to be like that, that rebirth or that phoenix, along with everybody else on the team, and we just needed a redo on that franchise, and but looking back, working with John on Mythologies, it's one of those things where like, yeah, we gotta, that's our first console game for Midway Games, along with Open Ice, and just trying to have that as your defining moment.
Mhm.
But overall, being able to say like, hey, I worked on every aspect of whether it was Mortal Kombat or Injustice, and being able to say, hey, I made my mark on all those games, from motion capture, from obviously regular performance to motion capture, to choreography to illustrating, fatalities, just trying to do my best on everything.
And I think I say this on behalf of the fans. I think it certainly shows. Do you have any closing thoughts on the Mortal Kombat film itself?
Yes, it's entertaining film. I love the pacing and storyline. There's a lot of neat moments. I had mentioned before with with Scorpion and Sub-Zero showing up, Tagawa as Shang Tsung, and like you said, it's like that Enter the Dragon moment. That correlation, and you're like, wow, but it's like a fun ride. You know what I mean? There's not just one. Obviously, you got Robin Shu as Liu Kang. That's the main character. But
Mhm.
you got the Sonya and Kano fight, her like snapping his neck. There's just wonderful moments that are like, you kind of don't see in the game, but now it's brought to, celluloid. And it's very entertaining. I think it should be watched every now and then, just to remind yourself of like, hey, this is how movie making was back in the day, kind of fun.
Mr. Carlos Pesina, thank you so much for your time.
Ryan, thank you. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody listen to me babble. Thank you.
I know I certainly enjoyed it. Once again, my name is Ryan Bijan. We'll see you next time.